Okay, this week we're going to be discussing the question of what makes a Jew. How do you know that someone is Jewish? It seems kind of like a silly question because we know the answer, right? We know what makes somebody Jewish, as if, at least in the eyes of halakha, it means they have a Jewish mother. And so, if you're born with a Jewish mother, you're Jewish, or if you convert. To the point where there's all sorts of halachot about, a Jew who becomes a mumar, but he's still a Jew, right? It doesn't matter how far you stray, no matter what a Jew does, he always retains his heritage and connection to his people, even if he rejects the tradition. But the question is, how true is that? Meaning, halachically, sure, right? It goes from mother to son, but what about the ethos of a Jew or the identity of a Jew? How do you know that someone is Jewish? And is there something about the way that a person behaves that almost ipso facto identifies them as a Jew, or not as a Jew, in the sense that being a Jew isn't just something that you're born with, but something that you embody, and something that you come to identify as. So we'll see some agadot that kind of try to move more in that direction. Again, not, I think, trying to contradict the halachic ground truth of being a Jew is something that's very much genetic and hereditary, but still trying to hone in on this point that being Jewish is about more than just being born to a Jewish mother, but about being part of the Jewish people and what that means. So we'll just look at some nice agadot. There's nothing too deep this week, but just some nice agadot that kind of talk to this idea. So we'll start with our Gemara, which is where this is the jumping point, which is Yevamot on Daf Ayin Ten Amud Aleph. We're told as follows: Shlosha simanim yesh be'uma zu. So there are three signs in this nation. This nation, a reference here to Bnei Israel, the Jews. Rachmanim, Baishanim, וגומלי Chasadim. They are merciful. They are Baishanim, which is, it's not exactly shy, but more more passive, maybe. And they do acts of kindness. How do we know that these are the three signs of a Jew, or the Jewish people? Dichtiv, it says in Devarim, V'natan lecha rachamim v'rachemcha v'yirbecha. Okay, the Torah tells us that God will give you rachamim. So that's how we know that the Jews have rachamim. Baishanin, how do we know that they're Baishanin? Dichtiv, it says, Ba'avur tia yirato pnechem. Right, that God gave us the Torah so that His fear would be on our faces, meaning that we're people that are always trembling and are afraid. Gomle Chasadim, Dichtiv, Laman Sheitzavet Banav et Beito v'Gomer, that right, God, when He's musing about Avraham, whether He should tell him about Sodom, so He says, right, that He should command His offspring to be Gomle Chasadim. So we know that the Jews are Rachmanim, Baishanim, Gomle Chasadim. And then the Gemara concludes, Kol sheyesh bo shlosha simanim halalu ra'ui lidabek b'umazu. Whoever has these three signs is worthy to cleave to this nation. Right? That those are the qualities of a Jew, of the Jewish people, is that they are Rahmanim, Baishanim, Gomli Chasadim. Okay, so that's what our Gemara says. Let's look at a few other Gemaras that talk about a similar idea. So there's one that's actually kind of interesting in Beitza and Daf Lamed Bet Amud Bet, where the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rav Natan bar Abba, Amar Rav, Atire Bavel Yorde Gehenim Hem. So Atire is Aramaic for like Ashire. You swap the taf and the shin. So the rich people of Bavel they're destined for Gehenim. And Rav is from Bavel, don't forget. So he says the rich people of Gehenim are destined for, the rich people of Bavel are destined for Gehenim. How do we know this? Ki had Shabtai bar Marinus ikla la Bavel. Because someone named Shabtai bar Marinus went to Bavel once. Ba minayu iska v'lo yavule. He asked for like a place to do business, and they wouldn't give him. Mezone mezonami lo zinuhu. And he also asked for some food or some lodging, and they wouldn't give it to him. So Amar Hani me'erev Rav Ka'atu. So he said, these people, the rich people of Bavel, who refused me a place to do business, refused me hospitality, they are descendants of the Erev Rav. They have to be. Dichtiv v'natan lecha rachamim v'richamcha, which is the pasuk we saw earlier. Kol marachem ala briot bi'adua shu mizaro shel Avram Avinu. So anyone who has mercy on other people or acts kindly to other people, for sure you know he's a Jew. And conversely, anyone who does not act in that way, you know that he's not a Jew. So, right, this is obviously a kind of a polemical Gemara here in the sense that right? We know that being a Jew is not tied to if you're someone who has rachamim or not, right? It's about whether you're born Jewish or not. And he's talking about the rich people of Bavel in the Jewish community. But he's making more of a meta halachic statement here, saying that they shouldn't be Jews. They shouldn't be known as Jews, because the idea of what a Jew is not being represented by these people and their behavior. And we see a similar statement in the Gemara in Shabbat and Daf Kuf Nun Aleph Amud Bet. Tanya Rabbi Gamliel Omer, Rabbi Omer, Menatan Lecha Rachamim V'Richemcha V'Yirbecha. Okay, the same pasuk. Kol Merachem Al Abriot Merachamim Alav Min Hashamayim, V'Kol Mi She'ein Merachem Al Abriot Ein Merachamim Alav Min Hashamayim. So here it's a bit of a twist. So instead of saying anyone who's kind to other people must be Jewish, here it's saying who's kind to other people will receive kindness from God. And conversely, anyone who's not kind to other people will not receive kindness from God. So it's the same formula, but a bit of a different idea. But the bottom line is that what we see here is that someone who is a Baal Rachamim is a Jew in the sense of what a Jew is supposed to be. We have a similar idea, but with Baishanim, from a Gemara in Nedarim, Adaf Kaf Amud Aleph, where we're told as follows: Tanya. So if you remember, our Gemara in Yevamot said three things. It said Rahmanim, Baishanim, Ugomle Chasadim. So we saw Rahmanim from the story in Beitza. So now we see Baishanim here in the Gemara in Nedarim. It says as follows. So what is this a reference to? Zu busha. Right? People who have busha, who have a sense of self-consciousness, who are self-conscious in a sense, or have embarrassment, that is a healthy thing because it brings them to be fearful of sin. Right? People who have no sense of, that we know that there are people in the world who they don't care about. They don't get embarrassed. They just have this complex where nothing phases them, nothing embarrasses them. They just have a brazenness that prevents them from having a fear of sin. And so conversely, this teaches you that busha is something that's required, which brings you to your atchet. Mikan amru, from here, Chazal said, Siman yafeh ba'adam shu baishan. It's a good thing for a person to be a baishan. Acherim omrim, and then others say, Kol adam midbayesh lo bimhirahu choteh. Anyone who gets embarrassed easily does not sin easily. Mi she'en lo boshet panim be'yadua shelo amdu avotav al har Sinai. And anyone who does not have boshet panim, you know for a fact that his forefathers did not stand at Har Sinai. In other words, that he's not a Jew, or he's not descended from the original Jews. So here again, we have this idea that the Baishanim, something about being a Baishan is a Jewish trait, a Jewish quality. And here, I just thought of this now, actually, not when I was preparing the shir, but you can actually argue that this is maybe even a little bit different than the statement from before, where when Rav Natan bar Abba Marav said that, okay, the Jews that weren't Rahmanim in Bavel, that they had to come from the Erev Rav, right, which means that they were from this group of people that joined the Jews in the desert. So here in the Nedarim it says, that the ancestors did not stand at Har Sinai if they're not Baishanim. But even the Erev Rav was at Har Sinai, right? I think, right? The Erev Rav was also at Har Sinai. So here you're saying the Baishanim, if you want to be extra medayik here, the Baishanim were not even from the Erev Rav, because the Erev Rav stood on Har Sinai. So here it uses the language of B'yadua Shalom Du'av Otal Har Sinai. That means not only is he not descendant of Jews, he's not even descendants of the Erev Rav. He's from somewhere else entirely. Because busha is something that brings you to Yirat Chet, and Jews have Yirat Chet. So that's the Gemara in Nedarim on that. Now, there's an obvious question that kind of underpins all of this, which is not just that this isn't true. If you look out in the world, it's not the case. But more than that, who says that Rahmanim, fine, but is it like a blanket statement? Baishanim, is that necessarily something that you always want? Jews are supposed to be timid, they're supposed to be very introverted and embarrassed all the time. Is that really what a Jew is supposed to be like? So perhaps then you'd have a problem with this Gemara in Beitzah of Chaf Hamad Bet, which teaches as follows. Tana Mishmei de Rabbi Meir. Mipnei ma nitna Torah l'Yisrael. Why did the Jews merit to get the Torah? So we're all familiar with the famous midrash that the Jews were the only ones that accepted it and said Na'aseh v'nishma, and the other nations asked what was in it, and then they said no. So here the answer is different. It says, why did the Jews get the Torah? Mipnei shehen azin. Right? They have chutzpah. Tana deber bishmael mimino ejdat lamo. Yes, there's a pasuk in Vizot Bracha. So Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu Ru'in Halalu Shitinaten Lahem Dat Esh. Right, the Torah is referred to as Esh. So why is the Torah referred to as Esh? The drasha here is that God said that these are the ones that should be given the Torah of fire. Now, only the Jews would be able to accept a Torah of fire because they're a nation that's very fiery. Right, they're azin. They're not baishanin. That's the whole point here, right? They're people who they get worked up easily, and they're very whatever the adjectives are to describe them. They're people of fire. Okay. There's some that say datem shel elu esh shilmale lo nitna Torah l'Yisrael en kol umav lashon yichulin lamod b'fneihen. And another interpretation of this is that if Bnei Yisrael hadn't been given the Torah, then no nation would be able to stand before them. That the Torah almost like tempers the people's fire. V'hainu da'amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Gimel azinhen. There are three who compared to a group are azin. They're the most the most fiery, the most brazen, the most chutzpahdik. What are the three? Yisrael b'umot ha'olam. Okay, so the Bnei Yisrael compared to the nations. Kelev b'chayot, dogs compared to to animals. V'tar l'gol be'ofot, and chickens compared to other birds. There's some who say also a goat when it comes to domesticated animals. And there's some that say a specific type of bush when it comes to trees. That, right, just as we know, like dogs are vicious and very kind of, they bark and they're very active compared to perhaps other animals, so too these Bnei Yisrael are like that. And that's described as a good thing here, clearly, because that's what merited them to receive the Torah, and that's why the Torah of fire was given to them. And so this picture of the Jews maybe is more in line with the idea that they're an Am She'orf and they're always complaining, and in the modern incarnation of the Israeli culture and the Israeli stereotype of kind of the chutzpah, right? But it's certainly not the Rahmanim and Vaishanim. And so the question is, which is it, right? We just saw a whole bunch of Gemaras that said you should be someone who's merciful, someone who's kind, someone who's timid even, versus this Gemara, which seems to be saying the exact opposite, right? To throw a little bit more complexity to this, there's the famous Gemara in Sota and Daf Yudal Amud Aleph, which teaches as follows: the Torah tells us to follow God. How is that possible? How can you follow God? God is an all-consuming fire. How are you supposed to follow Him? When it says to follow God, it means follow His attributes. What does that mean? He clothes the naked, you clothe the naked. Right? He visits the sick, you visit the sick. Right? The qualities that are listed in this Gemara are the types of things that, right, we know intuitively are just good things to do. Right? It's a good thing to do, to clothe the poor, and to clothe the people who are naked, to visit the sick, to comfort mourners, to bury the dead. Like, those are obvious things almost. But that's what the Gemara is interpreting it to mean when you have to follow God, follow His midos, right? But the question is, we saw before that God is an Eshochla, right? And if He's an all-consuming fire, so if we're trying to emulate God, why don't we try to emulate the all-consuming fire aspect of Him? Why don't we emulate His azut, which is exactly what the Gemara in Beitza said, that the Jews are azin, right? They are, and that's a good thing. That's why they merit the Torah of God. So here again, we have this Gemara in Sota, which perhaps seems to kind of have a different take on this whole thing. So I think, kind of the answer here is perhaps an obvious one once it's said out loud, but there's a place, it's Kol Zman Tachat HaShamayim. There's a place for everything, right? That when it comes to the Jewish people, there's a time for them to be... Thank you, Chaim. I just read the comment. When it comes to... I lost my train of thought. Yeah. Right, when it comes to Torah, the Jews have to be azin. Right, that the reason the Torah was given to the Jews, and it's a Torah of fire, is because Bnei Yisrael are supposed to be fiery when it comes to Limud Torah. Right, kinat sofrim tar b'chochma. You're supposed to be fiery when it comes to arguments in Lishem Shemaim, and when it comes to holiness, you're supposed to have a holy fire and a holy chutzpah. But when it comes to interacting with other people, and when it comes to being an or lagoyim, then you're supposed to be a Rahman and Baishan. And a Jew is supposed to be able to balance these two. Right? That on the one hand, you have to emulate God in the sense of when it comes to other people, bikur cholim, malbish arumim, nichum avelim, kover metim. Those are things that you do for others, other people. You have to emulate God in the sense that God does those things. But God is also an Eish Ochla. How do you emulate the Eish Ochla? Perhaps it's like the Gemara in Beit Tzah says, that you are an Eish when it comes to Eish, the Eish Dat Lamo, which is the Torah. And when it comes to Torah, then you're supposed to be fiery and not supposed to be timid, and question things and keep asking questions and keep pushing, and even be chutzpahdik, because that's how you get to real knowledge of Torah. I want to kind of conclude with the comments of the Iyun Yaakov, which is a bit of a tangent, but the Iyun Yaakov notes the following. He says, Shlosha simanim yesh be'umah zu. There's 3 signs for the nation. We saw Harchmanim, Vaybeishnin, וגומלי חסדים. So he says the following. Al dat di'ita b'Shabbat perek Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara in Masechet Shabbat says as follows. Darash ha-glilai. A certain Galilean made the following drasha. Brich rachamana dihiv oran tlitai la'am tlitai al dei tlitai biyom tlitai biyarcha tlitai. Okay, so blessed is Rahmana, is God, that He gave 3 Torahs to the nation of 3 at the hands of 3 on the 3rd day in the 3rd month. Excuse me. So what does that mean? So Rashi to that Gemara explains that it means 3 Torahs is Torah Nevi'im Uktuvim. The nation of 3 is Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. At the hands of 3, Moshe, Aaron, and I think Miriam. On the 3rd day, in the 3rd month, because the Torah was given in Sivan, which is the 3rd month, Nisan Iyar Sivan, and it was given on the 3rd day after Bnei Israel were told to separate themselves and purify themselves. And so there's something that this particular Galilean is darshaning about, something about the power of 3, right? That the Bnei Israel, blessed is God that He does things for Bnei Israel in 3s. It's the nation of 3 books, with 3 groups, with 3 leaders, where the Torah was given in the 3rd month on the 3rd day. Something about 3 is something very powerful. And the Iyun Yaakov is noting that in connection to this idea that also the Jews have Shlosha Simanim. There's 3 things that define a Jew. And he continues and says, Lachen yesh gimel simanim ba'omazu. V'al shlosha dvarim ha'olam omed v'kayam. We know there's 3 things that the world stands on. Right? It says in Pirkei Avot, al Torah v'dav v'gemilut chasadim. Which again, gemilut chasadim is one of the 3 things of the Jews. The Jews are gomlei chasadim. And so also there you have the world stands on 3 things, one of which is gemilut chasadim. V'neged shlosha avot. And also we have 3 forefathers. Right? This is a pasuk from Kohelet. The 3-threaded cord will not sever quickly. Right? That when you tie wicks together, like a Havdalah candle, if you tie at least 3 wicks together, that gives it a certain strength that it won't come apart. And so there's this idea that when you have things in groups of 3, that gives it a certain power, a certain strength. And so that's the drasha here, that the Jews, they have these Shlosha Simanim, and there's all these aspects of 3 when it comes to the Jewish people, and that's what gives them their strength, and they won't unravel easily. And there's also actually a Midrash Tanchuma, which elaborates on this theme of the power of 3. It says as follows. Bnei Yisrael came to Har Sinai b'chodesh hashlishi, in the 3rd month. Zeh she'amar katuv, Halo katavti lecha shalishim b'moetzot v'dat, Amar Rabbi Yehoshua b'Rabbi Nechemia, Zu Torah shotiotem meshulashim, Aleph Bet Gimel. Right, that this is a reference to Torah, whose letters are in groups of 3, Aleph Bet Gimel. Okay, v'akol haya meshulash. Everything was in groups of 3. Torah meshulashet, Torah Nevi'im Uktuvim. Mishnah meshulashet, Talmud Halachot v'Agadot. So also the Mishnah, the oral law, is in a group of 3. The Talmud, the Halacha, and the Agada. Okay. Hasarsur Mishulash, Miriam, Aaron, and Moshe. So the leadership was also a group of 3. Tfilah Mishuleshet, Erev Boker V'Tzoraim, right? Marav, Shachar, and Mincha. Kedusha Mishuleshet, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Right, then in the Kedusha we say Kadosh 3 times. Yisrael Mishulashim, Kanim Vim Yisraelim. And then it goes even further. It says Moshe, Otiotav Mishulashim. Right, the name Moshe has 3 letters. Mishevet Levi, Shotiotav Mishulashim. He was from the tribe of Levi, which has 3 letters. Mizer Mishulash, Avram Yitzchak V'Yakov. And he comes from a 3-layered inheritance of Avram Yitzchak and Yaakov. B'chodesh Mishulash, in the 3rd month, Nisan Iyar V'Sivan. Al Har Sin, Shotiotav Mishulashim. Right, that it was given according to the Midrash. Right, Har Sinai, Har Chorev. Another name is Har Sin. Sin has 3 letters. Shneimar v'yechenu b'mim bar Sin. V'lishloshet yamim nitkadshu. Shneimar v'ayu nechonim l'shloshet yamim, and that they had to become holy for 3 days before receiving the Torah. So here there's a very long elaboration to the Gemara and Shabbat about all the different areas where 3 appears in the tradition of the Jewish people. And it continues and says, Amar B'Shua bar Nechemia, L'olam hashlishi chaviv. The 3rd is beloved. Adam holid shlosha banim, Cain, Hevel, v'Shet. Right, Adam had 3 children, Cain and Hevel and Shet. Right, Shet chaviv. Shneimar zeh sefer toldot Adam uchtiv v'el b'tmto ketzalmo. Right, so Shet was the chaviv of the sons, because Hevel died, Cain was rejected, Shet was the beloved one. L'Noach shlosha banim, Shneimar v'yolad Noach et Shem et Cham v'et Yafet. Right, v'aval pi sheyefet gadol lo zachal gdula el Hashem. Right, even though Yefet was the oldest, we're taught Yefet was the oldest. Shem comes first, even though he was the 3rd, the youngest son, because Shlishi Chaviv. Shlosha banim le'Amram. Right, and then Amram had 3 sons: Miriam, Aaron, and Moshe, or 3 children. Uchtiv l'ulei Moshe b'chiro. Right, Moshe was the most beloved. Bishvatim, Reuven, Shimon, Levi. Levi was the 3rd son. Levi Chaviv. Shneimar be'et ha'i avdil Hashem et shevet ha'Levi. Right, B'mlachim Shaul, David, Shlomo. Shlomo Chaviv, Shneimar v'esher Shlomo kisei Hashem l'melech. So this is actually an interesting one, a bit shocking in a sense, that amongst the kings of Bnei Israel you had Shaul, David, Shlomo. Shlomo was the 3rd king, and he was the Chaviv, even more than David, it seems, according to this. I would actually just kind of, perhaps, the truth is that there was another king in between, right? That there is Shaul reigned, but then Mephibosheth reigned for a little bit. So technically, Mephibosheth was actually potentially king number 2, in which case David would be the 3rd king. So, if you want to interpret it that way, I don't know if Mephibosheth is actually considered one of the reigning kings, because in the story he was kind of this interim king that lost power pretty quickly. But perhaps then you could salvage David being the Chaviv. And then
it said earlier that Miriam was a leader.
Was a leader.
How was Miriam? No.
Yeah, she was the leader of the women, right? After Az Yashir, she took the right to Pimucholot, and she led the women. She was one of the leaders. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the assumption.
All right.
She led the women. Yeah. And then it concludes B'chodeshim Hashlishi Chaviv Shneimar B'chodesh Hashlishi, and Sivan was the month that the Torah was given. Last thing, and because we have 2 minutes left, there's a Mishnah in Kiddushin and Daf Mem Amud Bet that says the following. Remember, the Iyun Yaakov mentioned this idea of Hachut HaMishulash Lo B'mhira Yinatek, right? That when you have 3 of something, then that gives it a certain strength. Kol sheyesh no b'mikra u'v'mishnah u'v'derech eretz lo b'mhira hu choteh. Shneimar v'chut HaMishulash Lo B'mhira Yinatek. Anyone who has a knowledge of Torah Shebichtav, Torah Shebal Peh, and Derech Eretz will not sin quickly. Right? And then that's the drush of Chut HaMishulash Lo B'mhira Yinatek. Kol mi she'eno lo b'mikra lo b'mishnah v'lo b'derech eretz eno mina yishuv. And anyone who does not have these 3 things is not of this world. Does not deserve to be settled in this world. Right. So here there's a parallel, right, of a Mishnah, perhaps Mikra Mishnah v'derech eretz of Shlosha Dvarim Al HaMomed, Al Torah, which is Mikra, Al Avodah, which, right, is davening, but maybe you could understand that as Mishnah in some way, of Torah Shebal Peh, right, of the verbal Torah. And then Derech Eretz is Gemilut Chasadim, right, of how you behave with other people. So the world stands on those three things: Torah, Avodah, Gemilut, Chasadim. And so that's why we have here anyone who does not have Mikra, Mishnah, and Derech Eretz, Eino Mina Yishuv. Right? That the world does not stand. He's not one of the ones that makes the world stand. He's not settled in the world. But if you have all three of these things, then Achuta Mishulash Lo Bimhira Yenatek. Ad kan. Shkoyach.
Shkoyach.